Hi, it's Tuesday, October 28th, and we're continuing to track Hurricane Melissa, which has now made landfall in western Jamaica today as one of the strongest Atlantic hurricanes on record. It seems like a sobering sight that we've seen too many times in the past few years of a major hurricane attaining its peak intensity very close or at landfall, and Melissa is certainly no exception to this. We had recon planes go in this morning, both an Air Force and NOAA planes, and they found that the pressure had dipped down to 892 millibars. That is one of the deepest ever recorded in Atlantic basin history. And the maximum sustained winds had increased to about 185 miles per hour, with gusts of 220 miles per hour or more occurring in the eye wall. And so those conditions are now happening across western Jamaica. And I mean, right now, it's pretty much the most extreme weather you'll see on the planet happening right now across western Jamaica. And hopefully everybody is safe as the system continues pushing through. We'll continue to see throughout the day today extreme winds, high storm surge along the north and south coasts, and very heavy rainfall, which will likely lead to catastrophic flash flooding across the island, on top of what we've already gotten for the past few days. And taking a look again at some of this recon data, and huge thanks to the people who go out in these flights to collect all this data from the hurricanes. Without them, we would never know exactly how strong these storms get, and a lot of this data will go into making hurricane forecasts better in the future. And the first one to go in was the Air Force plane this morning. They found, again, that pressure dipping down to 893 millibars. The final dropson value was actually 892 millibars, and they found winds of 185 miles per hour in the eye wall by this point. And then after that, we had a NOAA plane go in. They had found the pressure more or less steady. It does wiggle a bit between the exact value between times, but generally we're in the mid to lower 890s for the pressure, and they also found extreme winds of 185 miles per hour. And notably with this flight, they dropped the dropson into the eye wall, the southern eye wall, and it attained a gust of about 250 miles per hour, not at the surface, a little bit off the surface, but still a very wild value to see. And so while at the surface in Jamaica we may not see wind gusts that high, in the high terrain we may see wind gusts get sort of close to that, as we do have some pretty high topography across the island. So again, some of the most extreme weather you'll see on the planet. Now, if there is any good news here, the storm's forward motion is increasing now. You can see instead of being stalled out south of the island, we are now making progress to the north. And you can see it better if we look at this longer range infrared loop. This goes over a more significant time period than the loop I just showed you. And you can see we are now picking up forward motion as it moves towards the northeast. And so as we go throughout the afternoon hours into the evening hours tonight, these extreme conditions will continue across western Jamaica, but eventually tonight the eye wall will move offshore as we move towards landfall in Cuba sometime early on Wednesday. Now, the system will weaken from its maximum wind. It likely has already. You can see the eye is degrading a little bit as it interacts with land, and we'll likely see this come offshore as a Category 5, low wind, or high-end Category 4. And once it moves offshore, we may see the weakening pace decrease in magnitude as it moves back over water. If we look at water vapor imagery, we can see that there is some increasing southwesterly shear across this part of the Caribbean. That's because we have a trough over the southeast U.S. that is starting to pick up the system and accelerate it off towards the northeast. Now, something that may be happening is you can see all of these upper level cirrus clouds across the western Atlantic. What this trough is doing is it's accelerating flow at the top of the troposphere in the western Atlantic, and so the storm is now tapping into that. And what this may allow is a more effective convective process, and that might be why the storm continued to intensify this morning. These jet interactions can sometimes aid hurricanes intensification even when vertical shear, like we've seen today, begins to increase. And so for that reason, once it moves back over water, we may see the weakening rate plateau for a time before it comes into eastern Cuba, and this is still expected to be a Category 4 hurricane by the time it comes into landfall sometime early on Wednesday. And we can see this happen if we look at the HAFS model, which is a high-resolution hurricane model. You can see the landfall today in Jamaica, but the pressure rises pretty substantially because it does interact with the landmass. But you'll see that by this point, it's still a Category 4 hurricane. And something I should note how the purple here has increased between passes south and north of Jamaica. As the storm interacts with the landmass, it may expand a little bit. So even though we're probably going to be looking at, a Category 4 hurricane, this may still have the surge of a high-end Cat 4 or low-end Cat 5 when it comes into eastern Cuba. And so we're likely going to see, again, catastrophic winds in nature that Category 4 winds typically are, and catastrophic storm surge along and east of where the center makes landfall. And you'll see that happen here on the model by early on Wednesday morning. That's the current expectation here. Now, once it makes landfall in eastern Cuba, the system will begin to weaken rapidly again, likely losing major hurricane intensity as it interacts with the high terrain across eastern Cuba. And this will be interacting with more land as it comes north towards the Bahamas. So we'll likely see that again lose major hurricane intensity as it does so. However, similar to what we just saw with when it was interacting with Jamaica, the wind field is once again going to grow. And so we're talking about a large Category 1 or Category 2 hurricane. And once again, that could mean that we have a storm surge that you would more so expect of a Category 3 or a Category 4 for the Bahamas as it comes further northeast, and also the large expansive hurricane force winds across the islands. And several of these islands are under a hurricane warning today, naturally, because of this larger wind field that will likely impact these islands. Now, as it pushes northeast, a similar state with this jet interaction to the north, we may see the system try to re-intensify some as it pushes northeast of the Bahamas, as there is still some warm water here that it may have an opportunity to try and regain Category 2 intensity. But I don't think it's going to be all too much, because you can tell the core size is much larger by this point. So it will likely struggle to intensify much. But what this does mean is that as it continues racing off to the northeast, you can see Bermuda is here. It may still be of significant strength when it gets up to the latitude of Bermuda. So this is on the model was still a Category 1 or Category 2 hurricane with a large wind field here coming across Bermuda. We have seen some shift in model guidance a little bit west of the island, but that will likely not matter all too much, as the wind field is going to be very large. And I'd imagine later today we'll see a hurricane watch issued for the island from the Bermuda Weather Service. And beyond this point, the system will be turning post-tropical and may get close to Atlantic Canada. You can see Newfoundland here pop up on the model frame for a little bit, but that's just going to be as a non-tropical cyclone and may just be like a typical nor'easter that you have this time of year. And if it takes this kind of a track like the half shows, you can see a lot of the strongest winds are on the eastern side, so we may avoid the worst of the weather there in Atlantic Canada. So putting all of that together, here's the current forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. You can see it made landfall in Jamaica and forecast to stay a major hurricane through the passage through eastern Cuba, and hurricane warnings in place naturally as the system comes through, and then weakening and losing major hurricane intensity as it passes through the Bahamas. Hurricane warnings in place there, and tropical storm warnings in place to the easternmost Turks and Caicos. And then we begin to race off towards the northeast, closer to Bermuda. You can see by Thursday evening, the system is making its closest approach to Bermuda, and again, we'll likely see a hurricane watch issued for the island sometime later today. Another big story is going to be the rainfall across Jamaica and Cuba. Across Jamaica this afternoon, on top of what we've already gotten, we could see additional 500 to 750 millimeters of rainfall. We could see some storm totals here end up over 50 inches, well over a meter in some spots. That will likely contribute to continued catastrophic flash flooding across the region. And across eastern Cuba, we could see very heavy rainfall in excess, potentially of 500 millimeters in some of the high terrain here that we have across the island. Though across the whole area, a broad swath of 150 to 400 millimeters expected there. Now, one thing before I go to the Bahamas part of this, note how in Hispaniola we could still see very heavy rainfall across southern Haiti and the southwestern Dominican Republic. One thing about this shear vector is that a lot of the showers and storms are being pushed still off to the eastern side, so we'll likely have some outer bands still rotate in periodically throughout the day today. That could have tropical storm force winds as well, and that's why we have a tropical storm warning still in place here for all of Haiti. And that will likely lead to additional rainfall, which could be widespread 150 to 200 millimeters more on top of the feet that we've gotten already, especially in southern Haiti. Now, pushing further north, you can see very heavy rainfall continues for the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. Widespread totals of 100 to 300 millimeters expected here as the system passes through. Though the good news is that we won't be seeing some of the more extreme totals that we see in Cuba and Jamaica, partly because of terrain, but also because the system is accelerating by that time in the forecast. And the final thing I'll show you is the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. For eastern Cuba, your time is pretty much up. Preparation should be done by now, as tropical storm conditions will likely be deteriorating across the island now. For the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, you've got the rest of the day today to make your preparations and finalize them across those islands. And for Bermuda, you've got until at earliest Thursday morning. So looking at Thursday morning or Thursday afternoon. So you've got the rest of the day and into the day on Wednesday to make your preparations ahead of the storm. And you can also see the probabilities here of tropical storm force winds now very high across Bermuda, highlighting again that even with those track shifts that I mentioned, because of the size, we'll likely still see tropical storm and potentially hurricane force winds impact the island in time. That's all that I've got for today. Stay safe in Jamaica as the hurricane continues passing through, and I'll have more videos on this as it continues tracking towards the northeast. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.